Hey there, coaches. I'm Rich Prado, owner of Play In School and host of Travel Ball Talk, where I talk to travel ball coaches from the best organizations about the current and future state of travel baseball. Today we're headed to Cincinnati, Ohio to talk with Jay Basil, founder of the Cincy Flames. It was quite a treat to get to talk with Jay. He's been involved with youth baseball longer than most of my listeners have been alive. And he's been running elite events for over 20 years already. It was a great conversation listening to comparisons between what travel ball was like 25 years ago versus today. I hope you enjoy this episode of Travel Ball Talk. Welcome back to another episode of Travel Ball Talk. Today we're heading out to Cincinnati to talk to longtime travel ball head honcho of the Cincy Flames. We're talking to Jay Basil today. Jay, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Rich.
I appreciate you coming on. I know you got a busy morning, so we'll try and hit a bunch of different topics today. And the first thing right out the gate for listeners, in many ways, travel baseball is sort of a new thing, right, in comparison to, say, travel softball, which has been around a long time. Because on the baseball side, we always had American Legion or Babe Ruth or the equivalents as sort of the baseball option. But I'm looking at your website, and it says something about 42 years in youth baseball with 20-plus years at this high-level travel ball. And that just blows me away. So I kind of want to just hand you the mic for a few minutes and talk about your personal background, and then go back into the history books to tell us how the Cincy Flames got started.
All right. I had 4 sons and a daughter, so that kind of started things at a very young age. When my oldest son started playing ball, I had decided, actually, when he started playing, and he started playing at about 5 or 6 years old, but I had decided when he started playing that I was not going to coach. Mm-hmm. And I was not at all, because I did not want to be one of those fathers that coached so his son could play, and so his son could play shortstop and bat third. But that quickly changed after I saw the quality of coaching at that young age, and kids were, half the kids were picking dandelions while one kid was taking BP, and nothing getting accomplished. And I started watching my oldest son, who I thought had some talent, had some skill, kind of started watching him regress. And at the time, the only person I complained to was my wife, and she said, you're acting like those people that you don't like are the ones who complain and don't do anything about it. Huh. And so that kind of prompted me into offering to help and offering to get involved. And of course, the next thing I know, the guy who was coaching a team asked me if I would take over, and one thing led to the next, and started coaching him, then coaching my next son, and it just evolved into more competitive ball. And it was probably in the mid 80s, I started putting kind of select teams together. It was more just kids in the neighborhood that took it more seriously and wanted to become better and better trained, and so that evolved, and from community ball into travel ball in just greater Cincinnati. And it was that until probably the late 80s or early 90s when actual travel ball started to take cold, and teams started traveling outside of their areas to play other competition, and then started the Flames in '94. So we've been, I think we're in our 26th year of the Flames.
So I got to tell you, the first thing that comes to mind when you were talking about you had kids picking dandelions out there. First of all, I don't know why everybody bashes dad coaches. I think, and that was your hesitation. You didn't want to be a dad coach, right?
Yeah.
My dad coached me the whole way up, and it turned out pretty good, you know. So you coached your sons all the way up, turned out pretty good. I don't know why everybody's so down on dad coaches. Oh, so back to the dandelions. We literally had a kid on our team. My dad nicknamed Buttercup for the same exact reason. You know, we'd play out, you know, in these terrible fields, these practice fields, and they had buttercups growing all over them. And this was one kid who we'd stick out in the outfield. All he would do is sit out there and pick those darn things. So his name was always Buttercup. So in the early '90s, when you had these teams, were you playing in? Now we're going way back. Was that mostly AAU events? Or what? Who was running those events in the late '80s and early '90s?
Well, actually, in the late '80s, we had a group in Cincinnati who there were like four organizations. I had the Flames, and then former big leaguer Tony Scott had the Bulls, and then the east side of Cincinnati kind of had a really high level select team, and then a team called Knuckles, which was a security company, and there were like four really top level teams. I mean, they weren't really even organizations at that time. I mean, Knuckles had a little bit of an organization. The TS Bulls had a little bit of an organization, but you know, the teams I had, one of the teams called the Sycamore Suns, another one called the Drillers. They were just individual teams. They weren't an organization. We just had kids who were, you know, pretty good ball players, and a lot of those kids went on. I mean, actually, most of those kids went on and played at some level of college ball, and some of them played professionally. You know, I coached Mike Bell, who was Buddy Bell's son, who had one of the teams had Ryan Grimmett, who set a number of records at Miami of Florida. Brian Conley, who you know, played in the Reds organization for a number of years.
And you had these guys as basically like little kids, like 12,
yeah,
12 you?
These were probably started 11, 12 years old, and we play, you know, that group, we played against each other for years, and it was just all high level competition, and probably the best players in Cincinnati on those teams. And then as travel ball started to evolve more in the early 90s, then you know, there was more dilution, you know, because there's only so many real top level elite players. So you get a little more dilution of talent as more teams try to enter the travel ball. But I think at that time, the one that was probably around that we used, that we played in, was AABC. And that was, but there were a lot of federations that came into their own back in the early 90s.
So at the early onset in the early 90s, when you had this select team, you had these 3 or 4 other teams that you would play against, basically in town. Were these kids also playing little league, and maybe I guess they weren't middle schoolers yet, so they weren't playing any little league. They were playing with you and sticking with you for basically a full season against mainly 3 other teams? That's incredible.
Yeah, pretty much.
At about the same. Go ahead.
No, there were like four of it, and I don't even want to call them organizations, because they just weren't
teams.
Really, they were just teams.
Sure.
All the same age, basically. We played. Now they did have knot hole. It was Greater Cincinnati knot hole back in those days, and that was kind of the select baseball of its time in the 80s. And so, teams and organizations that were around would play in Greater Cincinnati knot hole, but I want to say super select teams, like the 4 teams I was talking about, you kind of had a league of our own that we played in, and as well as, some of them may have played in Greater Cincinnati knot hole. But at that time, we really, there just wasn't traveling out of state and going to, all these different locations to play competition. We might draw a team from Columbus now and then that would come down and play, or we'd go out and play a team, from Columbus. But there wasn't a lot of that back in the 80s.
Yeah, I'm comparing what you're describing versus my experience, and we played here in Richmond, Virginia. We played 3 years in a row. That we put together a team and went to an AAU national championship. So this would have been, I think, 92, 93, 94. And we literally got together for a week of practice and then drove to the tournament. We didn't play any in-town teams. The first year, we were the only team in the state doing this. And so we just went and played. And let me think, that first year was in that year, I think it would have been 92, would have been national championship at the 12U level, would have been, I think, in Oklahoma. I think in Norman, Oklahoma. Either there or Iowa, and then flip-flop the two. The first year, we literally didn't even have to play to earn our spot. We just went out there to represent the state. The second year, they held a little qualifier tournament that had a handful of teams, and so our coaches took us down. We played those. We won that little tournament, and we got basically the bid from the state of Virginia. And then that third year, they hosted the tournament in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Now we're talking, I think, the 14U level, and now there's a few more teams, and so you could see it happening in the early to mid 90s, where it went from no teams just a few years later to a bunch of teams. And
and that's about the right timing. Early to mid 90s. You talk about the dramatic change, not only in travel ball, but in showcase events. Back in 95, 96, 97, there basically was area code games and Team One. And a lot of people don't even remember Team One, but that was a big national showcase started by a guy by the name of Jeff Spellman, and that was it. It was area code games and Team One, and here we are, 25, 26 years later, and you can go anywhere. There's showcases that. Everybody puts that title on something that they can, claim that it's a showcase, and it's all kinds of ways to extract money from desperate parents who don't want Johnny to be, or don't want Johnny to lose an opportunity to get that elusive college scholarship.
Yeah.
So it's very easy,
So
get mom and dad to spend a lot of money chasing it.
I'm curious. So I told you we basically did this AAU thing for a few years, and then all of a sudden our coach, he wanted to keep us together, but in our area, American Legion was a big thing. It was, hey, let's go do that during the summer during our high school years, and hey, that's where the college coaches, they go to recruit, so we want to be playing American Legion. What did you do with your boys as they reached the high school age, and now all of a sudden you said they all played Division I baseball? Did you keep these teams together, or did your guys go off and play American Legion back in so this would have been sort of mid to late 90s?
Yeah, no, mid to late 90s. We played, I had the Flames. I'd started the Flames, and then about the same time I started the Flames, the Indiana Bulls started up, and Midland, which is a well-known national or well-known organization nationally from Cincinnati, and those elite organizations started traveling and started going to the AAUs and the Farmington, New Mexico, Connie Mack, and so that's. I made sure. I mean, my sons always played on, one of those teams, Midland or the Flames, when they were high school age, and that's kind of what it evolved at that point in time.
Did they also do American Legion, or did they skip that?
American Legion was never that big in Cincinnati, past the 80s. I mean,
interesting.
American Legion just kind of became, just another way to, have kids play select ball, but not American Legion. It was never that big around Cincinnati.
Got it. It's interesting to hear how the different pockets of the country, valued one thing versus the other. Believe it or not, in 2020, there's still some pockets where American Legion is kind of the big deal, which actually blows me away, because we still have American Legion here in the Richmond, Virginia area, but it serves a different purpose than it did 20 years ago.
Right.
So I kind of want to go. I've got a few different questions. I don't know what the best order to go is, so we'll go with this. You've been doing this, as long as anybody who's in the travel baseball world at this point. What do you see as some of the, let's compare Travel Ball 2020 versus Travel Ball, 1995. What are some of the things that you loved about it back then? What are some of the things you loved about it today? And maybe compare and contrast, maybe how it's organized, and maybe the type of player that you saw back then versus the type of player you see today.
Well, in the late 80s, early to mid 90s, when I was coaching and virtually always coaching one of my sons, parents back then really stayed more in the background and didn't, they kind of let you do what you thought was best for their kid, and let them develop into young men as well as baseball players. But we felt like our job was to develop them to be productive adults, as well as be the best baseball player they could. That was enjoyable. one of the things I fell in love with about the game was the relationships with those players and the kids. And to this day, the relationship I still have with a lot of those kids who are young men now.
They're about my age. They're old men now.
They are.
Yeah, that crew is probably in their 40s at this point.
They are in their mid 40s, yep. Early and mid 40s. That is true. Things started changing in the once we hit the 2000s and gradually started changing more. It seemed like as travel ball went on, as parents got more protective of their kids. There's a lot more team jumping, from going from one team to another not because Johnny's not happy, it's because mom and dad aren't happy. And more parents, we all want our kids to have fun and be successful, but it seems like more parents want to fight their kids' battles for them, and they want everything to be okay. And they learn we only get so many opportunities in life to teach our kids life lessons, and a lot of parents today miss some of those opportunities because they don't let their kids learn from failure. Mm-hmm. And if you don't allow your kid to have failure and learn how to deal with failure, it's going to be very hard for them as adults to learn it at that time and learn how to make failure a motivator rather than something to blame on other people. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more of that today, where parents give their kids excuses for failure. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never because Johnny maybe just isn't working as hard, or maybe Johnny just doesn't have the talent. And parents have a hard time accepting that, and so it's easier for them to make excuses. Mm-hmm. And to give their kids some reason that's other than their own personal responsibility for their failures. And it's a travesty. I think it's one of the things, a lot of well-meaning parents make some very bad decisions for their kids.
Well, I tell you what, I talk to my wife about this very topic often. We have a 4-year-old. He'll be 5 here in November, and I struggle with the how do we provide him a safe way to fail? I want him to fail, but I don't want him to get demoralized. It's a tough thing, and we talk about it often. He needs failure. He needs to hear he needs to hear the word no, and he needs to hear that he's not going to get everything he wants to do. But it's tough. It's a tough thing. The problem is, if the trick is if we're helping him so much at 4, and he doesn't have those failing type of opportunities, can we change by the time he's 14 so that those failing opportunities come his way? Because that's so important. Let me back up a second. I want to get your perspective on a couple things. You said one of the nice things back in the day when this thing got going for you is the parents were staying more in the background, and I'm wondering why you think that was the case back then. I have a potential theory, but I want to hear, your answer before I toss out a possible answer of my own. Why do you think they stayed back in the background more?
I don't know that I have the answer, but I can only tell you from my experience. For me, I personally was raised by parents of the greatest generation. I mean, my father was in World War II, a decorated veteran. They gave me a lot of freedom and flexibility to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I paid the consequences when I made mistakes, but it didn't keep them from letting me find my own way. And, I think a lot of parents back then were raised by parents from the greatest generation. But as time evolved and Dr. Spock comes out with his book, and it started to become more of a feel-good generation, starting to raise kids of, Johnny gets a trophy for showing up. Self-esteem is bestowed upon them at birth. They don't have to earn it. They fight battles for them from not just sports, but academically. It's a different generation raised by a different generation.
Yep.
I was never one for the participation trophy. I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, those people who came up with that idea and concept had their logic and reason behind it. It's just something I just always totally disagreed with, because it's not real life. You don't get a job in the real world and get stroked and rewarded every day for showing up and doing your job.
Yeah, that's the expectation, right? That's not going above and beyond.
Yes.
Yes. I was wondering if back then nobody knew anything about anything, and they figured, hey, let the guy up front, let the guy in charge do his job, because we don't know any different or better anyway. So I'm wondering if, as there was a few cycles of players that went through this, and all of a sudden the parents were gaining some more information, now all of a sudden they were able to form kind of some opinions, right or wrong. Now all of a sudden it seemed like, hey, maybe they've got this information and they're gonna speak up about it, whether or not it was their place to do so. I don't know. I was just speculating. The other thing I was curious about was, do you think things began to change as it evolved into more of what it looks like today, which is very much a business and an industry, right? This is a gigantic industry. I wonder if
I don't think there's any doubt that definitely played a factor, and has played a factor in it. But I'm a firm believer that so much of it comes from home. It comes from mom and dad, and I mean it's the people you're around every day, and parents sometimes just don't understand, or don't accept the fact of what an impact they have on simple conversations. They can have a conversation around the dinner table that has a lasting impact on their child, mm-hmm. and a negative impact on them, unbeknownst to them. They're sitting there criticizing something that the coach did, and it automatically triggers some level of disrespect for the coach, mm-hmm. if the parents are saying anything negative about that coach, and even if it's innocent.
Yeah.
I with 5 kids, and all of them playing sports, I can tell you there were many times in my careers that I thought that their coaches in whatever sport it was were idiots and had no idea what they were doing. But I never let my kids know what I thought, because I never wanted them to have an excuse for not working hard.
That's a tremendous lesson right there. That's a tremendous lesson. So I'm assuming that going back to the early days, that you had some kind of full-time job, and the baseball thing was just hey, I'm gonna help out on the weekends or whatever. And as time progressed, my assumption, and I want you to kind of fill in the blanks here, is that this thing grew, and you transitioned away from whatever your former life was into running the Flames full time. Am I close or am I way off?
Well, you're close.
All right.
Well, my background, I actually started after college. I was a dentist.
Oh, wow.
And I was a practicing dentist, but I was a dentist who had a business degree from Ohio State. And I'd gone to Ohio State in business and was pursuing a business degree when I figured out, I was close to graduating and I was going to actually have to go to work for somebody. And I thought it didn't appeal to me, the thought of, punching a time clock and going to work for somebody. So dentistry kind of crossed my path, and a good friend of mine who had gotten accepted to dental school encouraged me to look into it. So long story short, I took some pre-dental classes, went to dental school, spent a couple of years in the Air Force practicing dentistry, and then went back into private practice, in Cincinnati, northern Cincinnati. And actually only practiced for 7 years before I retired for the business world, because my true passion was being an entrepreneur, and I had some opportunities to, use my entrepreneurship to start a couple of businesses. And so I ended up leaving dentistry for the business world, which gave me more flexibility. It's about more flexibility to deal with youth baseball and get involved with my kids who were playing multiple sports at the time, and get involved with them. And so this may sound strange, but the main business that I started after dentistry was the nacho business.
No kidding.
It was nacho chips and cheese.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I still own part of the company. Still own 20% of the company. I sold it back in the late 90s, but I still own part of the company, and it's actually done well. We do stadiums and arenas and ballparks, and we're the largest cheese supplier to the movie theater industry in the world.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm glad I asked this question.
From dentistry to selling nachos. And,
outstanding.
And my passion was always youth baseball, and so the nacho business gave me a lot of opportunity to spend with youth baseball and my kids, and be involved in their activities and coaching. And during all that time, I started the Flames.
Yeah, and so as the Flames progressed, I'm assuming you added more and more teams at from youth level up through high school, and probably multiple teams per age group. Can you think back? What do you estimate was the largest number of Flames teams you had? And I should add, currently you even have softball teams. So
we do.
We just
added softball. We just added softball a year ago. And I think that's going to be a tremendous program for us. We have two really good teams right now.
Are you currently at the largest number of teams you've ever had, or did you peak before and then shrink back a little bit?
No, we are currently at the largest number we've ever had, because we recently have gone to two teams max at each age group. We were pretty much a one team at each age group organization for many years.
So you're two teams per age group from what's the lowest age group you start at?
8U. So 8 through 8.
8 through 18, two teams, and now you just added softball. And to add to that, you're running a full slate of events, of tournaments and showcases. My assumption is, if you personally are probably putting in full-time hours, and I have to assume you also have some people helping you.
Well, I turned the organization over to the day-to-day operations of the Flames. I turned over this year to my number 2 son, and
does he know that you call him? Does he know that you call him number 2?
Well, yeah, I call him 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I refer to him. I turned it over to Adam and another former player of mine who was on my original 1994 team, Wes Milburn. So Adam, my son Adam and Wes, this year have taken over the day-to-day operations of the Flames.
And that's the teams. You're talking about day-to-day operations.
I'm talking day-to-day operations of the teams. I'm still running the tournaments. I'm still doing the tournaments. That's kind of my forte as of these days, because I've had so many relationships with college coaches, having coached on the field for 32 of those 40-some years. I learned what I loved about travel tournaments, what I loved about well-run tournaments and what I didn't like about tournaments. And I've kind of taken that knowledge and incorporated it into our tournaments. I have a relationship with all of the colleges. Cincinnati's kind of a unique spot, because in Cincinnati, we have 31 division schools within 2 hours of Cincinnati.
Incredible.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many other areas of the country that can have, can claim that. So we, having a relationship with all the college coaches around our area. In the summer, I have, part of our venues are University of Cincinnati, Miami University, Wright State University, Northern Kentucky University. They get, pretty much give me their fields in the summer, because we put prospects on their fields, and they like having prospects on their fields.
Yeah.
It's easy to get kids seen at our events because it's easy access for all these colleges to come to Cincinnati. So it's, with the reputation we have of running high-level events, the scouts come.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, as from the outside looking in, what I've noticed over the last, 5+ years is that teams that I'm very familiar with from the Mid-Atlantic region have been flocking to Cincinnati, because the truth be told, not every single kid can play in the South. Not every single kid can play in the Southeast. So, okay, what do? Let's head over to Cincinnati to play in one of Jay's events, because that opens up the Midwest. So if you're a team from Maryland or Virginia or North Carolina, you head up there and you're playing in front of a completely different crop of coaches. And
that is very true.
We do have
a lot of teams from your area. I mean, right there in Richmond
I know the Braves head out there, and
Tommy Mayer has been sending teams out to our area for 10, 15 years. I mean, he comes every year.
Yep, and strategically, it's a strong play. Again, because if you're playing in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, you're going to get in front of those types of coaches, and there's plenty of those coaches, but not every single kid fits there. So let's open up the Midwest by heading to a couple of strategic events that Jay's running. The other place that I'm seeing a lot of people head to is from the Mid-Atlantic. They're heading up to New Jersey to play at Diamond Nation, and it's sort of the same. It's the same plan.
Yeah.
Let's get in front of a different core of coaches. Let's open up sort of the Northeast, which is, strategically speaking, it's a smart play. Which brings us.
That's pretty much what I mean. Our objective is to get kids in front of college coaches, and being in the location we are, and having the venues that we have, it's pretty easy.
Are you seeing any West Coast teams make the travel out to Cincinnati?
We Colorado is about far. We get a lot of Colorado teams, Colorado, Missouri, and Texas. I mean, I think we've got right now. I know of 6 Texas teams that are coming up to Cincinnati this year.
Right. It makes great sense for the same exact reasons that I just described. Because if you're playing in Dallas and Houston, you're going to play in front of the same coaches basically every weekend. How do you open up a new region? You get to it. You drive to it or fly to it. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the California teams. Although I could almost see some California teams doing trips straight to New England, because there's so many. I know a lot of the West Coast teams with tremendous high academic kids, man, head straight to New England. But what a neat thing to just. I would have never guessed that there's, what'd you say, 31 D1 programs within an easy 2-hour drive. So
and that doesn't count the D2, D3,
of course,
NAI, and JUCO. I mean, so.
Of course. So you talked about how one of the one of the assets of running your events right there is you have access to those fields, which brings us to 2020. For those of you listening to this, in 5 or 10 years, this is the year of the COVID. 2020, everything was shut down, including high school fields were mostly unusable. Access was locked out, and most colleges' access was locked out. And this was a topic I wanted to ask you about, which seems to work really well here. What kind of adjustments did you have to make, both on the team side with the Flames, but also with the tournament side? Maybe you can start with the tournaments, because we're talking about that right now. What kind of adjustments did you have to make? Were you able to get on the college fields, or did you have to go elsewhere?
We did not. All of our colleges were closed the entire year. Now, there were a couple of times where, for instance, UC called me and said, "Hey, I think we're going to be able to open back up for your, some of your late July tournaments or your early August tournament." And then, it would get to the president's desk, and and he would, put a nix on it. But we truly were making adjustments on the fly the entire summer. Now, we were one of the lucky ones, I guess, during the year that we got all of our tournaments in. We got every weekend, and we got every tournament in. But I was working with 6 different health departments between the county and city health departments in 2 different states, Kentucky and Ohio, because we're right on the river. So I'm working with 6 different health departments, and your colleges are shut down. Your high schools, early on, the high schools just didn't know what to do. They were, some of them were afraid to open up.
Yep.
Some didn't want to be the first to open up.
Yeah.
And so, I was able to get a couple of high schools to agree to open for us. And once I got a couple to agree, a few more started falling in line because they knew they weren't going to be the first.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of our fields. So we have some really nice turf fields that are actually not high school fields, even though high schools use them as their home field, but they're township run, or they're community based.
Yep.
The Reds have an organization called the Reds Community Fund, and they do a lot with inner city. They do a lot with taking baseball fields and turning them into beautiful turf fields. And Reds have been doing that for a number of years, and I've had a long time relationship with the Reds. So pretty much when they redo a field, I'm kind of the first one they contact, because they know I'm going to be able to run it every weekend during the summer, and it gives them a nice steady stream of income, and it gives us a great turf field. So all of our fields now, it's virtually every one of our events, all of our fields are college fields and turf high school or turf fields. So the nice thing about that is with turf is king when you're running a tournament.
Of course.
So we play. I mean, we play, and we don't have to. We might have some delays. It's rare. I think we lost 2 games this past summer because of rain.
Unreal.
And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of teams and games. Probably a couple thousand games, and we lost. I think 2 games the entire summer. So that's what turf will do for you.
Yeah, no doubt. And how did your son, Adam, who runs the teams, what was some of the adjustments that he had to make on the team side because of all the COVID shutdowns?
Well, they actually had to cancel out of some of the bigger tournaments, for like the WWBA in Atlanta. Just hard to justify the expense when there's no college that's going to be there.
Sure.
And so there were some travel that had to be modified or done away with during this COVID crisis. And he had to close the indoor facility. I mean, we have an indoor training facility that he and Wes train all of our Plains kids, and he had to close it for 3 months during all of this.
Incredible.
But, so that was pretty devastating from a business standpoint, because that's kind of how he makes a living, is giving lessons and running the organization. So it made it tough. I mean, but no different than any other organization around the country. I mean, everybody suffered in unison, because of well, I'll tell you one perfect example of making adjustments on the fly. We had a tournament in July, and this particular tournament was starting on a Wednesday, so out-of-town teams are traveling on Tuesday, and on Tuesday I've got a team from New York that half the parents are already in Cincinnati on Tuesday for their 8 a.m. game on Wednesday. The other half are on their way when the governor of New York put Ohio on the do not travel list, and they had to go home. And so, they miss out on the tournament. They have to go home, and we have to adjust the schedule the night before the tournament.
Unbelievable. It in a schedule that you'd probably already had to adjust several times before that.
Exactly.
So
that's one thing that happened is, we had no reports of any COVID cases from our events or leaving our events, but we did have a number of teams that canceled late because parents got spooked and just, they felt like they didn't want to risk it, and so
Sure.
all of a sudden you're planning on having a 40-team tournament, and all of a sudden, 3 or 4 teams drop out.
Yeah. And then you got to redo the whole schedule again.
That's great too. Yeah.
Well, listen,
It's
I can tell you're on your way to your next meeting. Sounds like you hopped in the car. I want to ask you maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. I wanted to give you a chance to talk on recruiting. Again, this is I guess directly related to COVID again. The NCAA made some decisions early on, and so I thought I'd give you a chance to kind of talk your mind on it.
Well, I think, like a lot of people, I have mixed emotions about what the NCAA has done. I think it's great that they gave the kids in spring sports an extra year of eligibility, because it wasn't their fault that COVID came along and they lost the season. But I also realized that the 4 classes after these kids, the 2020s, 2021s, 22s, 23s, those kids coming out of high school are all affected by it as well, and not in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm personally happy that I do not have any kids graduating high school in the next year or two.
Yeah.
Because it would be completely different than the experience that they had. I was fortunate enough that 3 of my 4 kids all started as freshmen, and I would say that would not be the case for all of them under this new mandate of an extra year of eligibility. And so I feel really awful for the kids coming out of high school these next 4 years.
I tell you what, you say you have mixed emotions. I don't have mixed emotions. I'll say it very bluntly. I believe that the NCAA messed up. I believe they overreacted in an effort to make people feel good, which is kind of ironic. Earlier in this conversation, we talked about letting our children fail and not coming to their defense and fighting their battles for them. In so many ways, it's almost like the NCAA did that here in an effort to make all these kids feel good. What they did was they screwed the pooch for the next 4 years. And not only that, instead of them being the bad guy today, what they've created was a situation where every single coach is going to have to be the bad guy. They can't keep it.
That is true. And in talking to some of these D1 coaches I'm close with, they're not looking forward to these next 2 years.
You simply are not going to be able to. It doesn't matter if the NCAA allows you to keep expanded rosters forever. It just doesn't make sense to keep 50 guys around. And so what are you going to do? You're going to tell some kids to go home. Your services are no longer needed. Will that be a kid who's been on campus for 5 years, or will that be a kid that you recruited who just showed up on campus? Either way, somebody's going to get told to go home, which means there's going to be a lot of cuts coming. And that's not a phrase we usually talk about in college baseball. Most programs do a pretty good job of recruiting their needs. You show up on campus, and unless you've done something pretty bad, you're going to be around in the spring. And I just feel like we've set thousands of coaches up to be the bad guy here, when the NCAA didn't need to make any decision when they did. They could have just pushed pause, just taken a breath, and thought through some of this stuff a little bit. It's like you've said, it's going to impact programs and kids for 4+ years.
There's 8 classes affected by it. The 4 classes that are in college and the 4 classes that are in high school. So there are 8 classes that are affected.
It's terrible. It's terrible. I think it was a gigantic swing and miss, and they were trying to do a good thing. Like, I think it came from a place of good, but a total backfire, in my opinion.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Rich. I was just trying to be a little more politically correct.
Well, that's all right. Maybe I don't know. I don't think anybody from the NCAA is listening. Because let me tell you, if they were, on my very first episode with Bob Reichman from the Scorpions, he spent about 30 minutes absolutely throat punching the NCAA, and this was pre-COVID. So yeah, I don't think they're listening into Travel Ball Talk very much anymore. Jay, this has been a ton of fun. Just I think what I'll do is just ask you if there's any kind of parting words. The target listener here is a coach who's either probably already in travel baseball, or maybe looking to get into travel baseball coaching. And obviously there's probably some parents who are listening in as well. Do you have any sort of parting words for those coaches who are, fighting the good fight?
Well, I don't know that I have any, great words of wisdom. I think that, when you're coaching kids that have aspirations of going to the next level, you as a coach owe it to them to give them the best opportunity to be seen and, get recruited. There's tons of, opportunities across the country and there's more every day. It seems, every day it seems like somebody's got something else. They're not all, top level, but there's certainly enough top level events and showcases and stuff that, you can get your kids into. I mean, today, kids really can't fall through the cracks. Back in the 90s when I was starting this, you could have great players fall through the cracks, and we spent a lot of time, helping kids get seen and recruited and calling college coaches. And, I had a pretty good line on a lot of college coaches around the country that I could call them and say, hey, you need to see this kid, and they'd come see him. Today, there's not as much of that because of PBR and Perfect Game. They get kids on the radar pretty quickly. If you're legit, it's hard to fall through the cracks. If you're going to, the right events, and, some people think they have to do PBR every weekend or they have to do Perfect Game every weekend. I'm not one of those. I think if you do a Perfect Game event, you're on their radar. If you're good enough, scouts are going to find you today.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I think that's a great spot to wrap it up. Coach, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate your time today. Might have to do this a round 2 again in the near future, and we spent so much time talking about the history, which was awesome, just because a lot of the people I bring on here have been doing this for somewhere between 1 and 10 years, and you've been doing it for 4 decades already. So it was a great honor to kind of hear those stories from back in the day. I appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Rich, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
You got it. Talk soon.
All right. Bye.